3 weeks had passed since Deputy Marshal Morrison's visit, and the ranch had settled into a tense routine of careful normalcy. Elena had begun working with the federal investigators, providing detailed information about the criminal organization while Thomas maintained his regular ranch operations under the watchful eye of federal agents positioned discreetly around the property. Elena's testimony had proven invaluable to the federal case. She possessed specific details about ship manifests, financial transactions, and the identities of key players in the trafficking network. Her careful observations during the voyage and her conversations with other victims provided prosecutors with evidence they needed to build a comprehensive case. During this period, Thomas and Elena had continued developing their personal relationship despite the extraordinary circumstances. Elena had proven to be everything Thomas had hoped for in a partner: intelligent, capable, and genuinely interested in ranch life. She had taken over much of the cooking and had begun planning improvements to the garden that would provide fresh vegetables and herbs. Thomas found himself falling genuinely in love with Elena, not just as a protective response to her situation, but because of her strength, intelligence, and the easy compatibility they had discovered in daily life together. Elena seemed to share his feelings, though they had both agreed to postpone any formal commitment until her legal situation was fully resolved. On a crisp October morning, Marshal Morrison arrived at the ranch with significant news about the federal investigation. Thomas and Elena gathered around the kitchen table as Morrison spread out documents and maps showing the scope of the criminal operation. "Miss Volkov, your information has been crucial in helping us understand how this organization operates," Morrison began. "We've identified their main staging areas in New York and Chicago, and we've traced financial connections to criminal networks in several European cities." Elena leaned forward attentively. "Have you been able to help the other women who were trapped in this situation?" Morrison smiled. "That's the best news I have to share. Based on your testimony, we conducted simultaneous raids in 4 cities last week. We rescued 37 women from various forms of forced labor and arrested 23 people involved in the trafficking operation." Elena's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank God. I have been thinking about Katerina and the others constantly." "We found your friend Katerina in San Francisco," Morrison continued. "She's safe now and has provided additional testimony that supports your account of events. She specifically asked me to tell you that your escape gave her hope during her captivity." Thomas felt overwhelming relief that Elena's courage in testifying had led to such positive results. The federal case had grown far beyond their local situation to become a significant blow against organized human trafficking. Morrison continued with more details about the legal proceedings. Dmitry Petrov and 3 of his associates were arrested in Denver attempting to intimidate another witness. They're currently being held without bail on federal charges including kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. "Does that mean the immediate danger to Elena is over?" Thomas asked. "Largely, yes. The organization's leadership has been disrupted, and most of their operational funds have been seized. However, we recommend continued caution for the next few months while trials proceed." Elena had been quiet during this discussion, and Thomas could see that she was processing the emotional impact of learning about her friend's rescue and the successful disruption of the criminal network. "Marshal Morrison," Elena said finally, "what will happen to the women who were rescued? Do they have options for staying in America legally?" Morrison nodded. "That's another piece of good news. The federal government has established a special program for trafficking victims. Women who cooperate with prosecution efforts can receive permanent legal status and assistance finding legitimate employment or education opportunities." "And the fraudulent contracts we were forced to sign?" Elena asked. "All null and void. The federal court has ruled that contracts obtained through fraud and coercion have no legal standing. You and the other women owe nothing to these criminals." Thomas felt a tremendous weight lifting from his shoulders. Elena was finally and truly free to make her own choices about her future in America without legal threats or criminal coercion. Over the following days, life at the ranch began to return to something approaching normal. The federal agents reduced their presence around the property, though they maintained periodic check-ins with Thomas and Elena. More importantly, Elena began to relax completely for the first time since her arrival. With the immediate crisis resolved, Thomas and Elena could finally focus on exploring their relationship without the pressure of external threats. They spent long evenings talking about their hopes for the future, their compatibility as potential life partners, and their shared vision for the ranch. Elena had proven to be an excellent partner in ranch operations. She had natural instincts for animal care and had quickly learned the seasonal rhythms of cattle ranching. Her suggestions for improving efficiency had already resulted in measurable benefits to the operation. Thomas, Elena said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset, I have been thinking about what I want my life in America to become. Thomas encouraged her to continue, though he felt nervous about what she might say. Elena now had complete freedom to choose her future, including the option to leave Montana and start fresh somewhere else. I want to build a life here with you, Elena said simply. Not because I need rescue or protection, but because I believe we can create something wonderful together. The challenges we have faced have shown me what kind of man you are, and I have grown to love you genuinely. Thomas felt his heart racing with joy and relief. Elena, I've been hoping you would say something like that. I love you too, not just because of the circumstances that brought us together, but because of who you are and what we've discovered we can be together. Elena smiled and took his hand. Then, perhaps we should begin planning for our wedding and our future together. Thomas had been carrying his grandmother's engagement ring in his pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment to propose formally. He pulled out the simple gold band with its modest diamond and knelt beside Elena's chair. Elena Volkov, will you marry me and become my partner in building a life together here in Montana? Elena's face lit up with pure happiness. Yes, Thomas Mitchell. I would be honored to marry you and build our future together. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Copper Falls. The entire community turned out to celebrate, and many of the women Elena had met expressed genuine excitement about having her as a permanent member of their community. Sheriff Henderson served as Thomas's best man, and Sarah Williams had helped Elena create a beautiful wedding dress from fabric ordered specially from Denver. Marshall Morrison attended the ceremony, representing the federal government's gratitude for Elena's crucial testimony in the trafficking case. During the wedding reception at the town hall, Elena was approached by several women who expressed interest in her sewing skills. Within a month of the wedding, Elena had established a small but thriving seamstress business, taking on projects ranging from wedding dresses to ranch work clothes. Elena's business success provided her with independent income and a sense of professional accomplishment that complemented her role as Thomas's wife and partner in ranch operations. She had achieved the economic independence and respect that had motivated her original desire to emigrate to America. 6 months after the wedding, Elena received a letter from Katerina, who had settled in San Francisco and was working as a translator for other immigrant women. Katerina reported that she was healthy, happy, and grateful for the courage Elena had shown in escaping and testifying against their captors. The letter also included updates about some of the other women who had been rescued from the trafficking operation. Several had found legitimate employment, a few had married and started families, and most were working to rebuild their lives with the support of social service organizations. Elena shared Katerina's letter with Thomas, and they both felt satisfied that their difficult experience had led to positive outcomes for many people beyond themselves. The criminal network had been permanently disrupted, and dozens of women had been freed from exploitation. A year after their wedding, Elena discovered she was pregnant with their first child. The pregnancy represented the complete transformation of her life from victim of criminal exploitation to beloved wife, successful businesswoman, and expectant mother in a supportive community. Thomas converted one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery, and Elena began planning modifications to her sewing business that would allow her to continue working while caring for their child. The ranch had prospered under their joint management, and they were planning to expand their cattle operation the following year. One evening, as they sat together planning for their growing family, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to Montana. Thomas, when I first wrote to you from Russia, I hoped to find opportunity and perhaps companionship in America. I never imagined I would find such love, and fulfillment. Thomas put his arm around his wife, feeling grateful for the series of events that had brought them together. Elena, you came here seeking a new life, but you also gave me a new life that I never expected to find. Elena had indeed found the new life she had sought in America, but it had come through trials and dangers she could never have anticipated. Her courage in escaping from criminal captors and testifying against human traffickers had not only secured her own freedom, but had helped rescue dozens of other women from exploitation. The letters that had begun their relationship had promised partnership and mutual respect. The reality of their marriage had exceeded those promises, creating a relationship built on love, shared challenges overcome together, and genuine compatibility in building their future. Their ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, and Elena's sewing business had grown to serve customers throughout the region. She had become a respected member of the Copper Falls community, known for her business skills, her contributions to church activities, and her willingness to help other newcomers adjust to life in Montana. Marshal Morrison continued to visit occasionally, updating them on the ongoing prosecutions of the trafficking network leaders. Elena's testimony had been crucial in securing convictions that resulted in long prison sentences for the main perpetrators. The federal program for trafficking victims had helped dozens of women establish new lives across the country. 2 years after Elena's arrival in Montana, Dmitry Petrov and his key associates were sentenced to lengthy federal prison terms. The criminal organization had been completely dismantled, and law enforcement agencies had established better systems for identifying and investigating human trafficking operations. Elena attended the final court proceedings, wanting to see justice completed for herself and the other victims. When the judge announced the maximum sentences for all defendants, Elena felt a profound sense of closure about the traumatic aspects of her journey to America. That evening, Elena and Thomas celebrated with their infant daughter Sarah, named for the woman who had first welcomed Elena into the Copper Falls community. Their ranch house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Elena's sewing workshop occupied a bright room where she could work while caring for their child. Looking back on her experience, Elena often marveled at how events that had begun so frightfully had led to such happiness and fulfillment. Her courage in escaping from criminals and her determination to build a legitimate new life had created opportunities that exceeded her original dreams. Thomas frequently told their daughter the story of how her mother had traveled across the ocean to find a new life in America, emphasizing Elena's bravery and intelligence in overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. He wanted Sarah to understand that her mother was a hero who had not only saved herself, but had helped save many other women. Elena's correspondence with Katerina and other trafficking survivors continued for many years. Several of the women visited Montana to see how Elena had built her new life, and Elena traveled occasionally to other western cities to attend weddings and celebrations for women she had known during their shared ordeal. The mail-order bride advertisement that had brought Thomas and Elena together had promised companionship and partnership in building a new life together. Neither of them could have anticipated that their relationship would begin with such dramatic challenges, or that overcoming those challenges would create such a strong foundation for their marriage. Elena had come to Montana seeking opportunity and respect as an equal partner in building a new life. Thomas had been seeking a companion who would share his vision for ranch life and family. Both had found far more than they had originally hoped for, creating a relationship that balanced love, mutual respect, shared work, and genuine partnership in all aspects of their lives together. Their story became part of the local folklore in Copper Falls, representing both the opportunities available in the American West and the importance of communities protecting newcomers from those who would exploit their vulnerability. Elena's courage and Thomas's integrity were remembered as examples of how ordinary people could triumph over extraordinary challenges through determination and mutual support. The ranch that had provided refuge during Elena's crisis became the foundation for their prosperous family life. The garden that Elena had planned during her first anxious days in Montana grew to provide fresh produce for their table and surplus crops for their neighbors. The simple wooden house that had offered sanctuary grew into a warm family home filled with laughter, love, and the satisfaction of dreams achieved through hard work and courage. Elena's journey from a desperate young woman fleeing poverty in Russia to a respected businesswoman and beloved wife in Montana represented the best possibilities of American opportunity combined with the strength that comes from facing and overcoming serious challenges. Her story inspired other immigrant women and demonstrated the importance of community support in helping newcomers build successful lives. When Elena and Thomas celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their 3 children and the friends who had become their extended family, they reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them together. What had begun as a simple correspondence between strangers seeking companionship had grown into a love story that encompassed danger, courage, justice, and ultimate triumph over those who would exploit the vulnerable. Thomas woke before dawn, as was his habit, but found himself immediately alert with worry about the previous day's confrontation with Dmitry Petrov. Elena had shown remarkable courage in explaining her situation, but Thomas knew that dangerous men like Petrov rarely gave up easily when money was involved. He dressed quietly and stepped outside to check the perimeter of his property. The morning air was crisp and clear, but Thomas felt uneasy. His cattle seemed restless in the distance, and he noticed fresh horse tracks near the fence line that hadn't been there the evening before. When Thomas returned to the house, he found Elena already awake and preparing breakfast. She had braided her hair simply and wore one of the plain work dresses he had seen women wearing in town. Despite everything she had been through, she moved efficiently around the kitchen, creating a meal that filled the house with comforting aromas. "Did you sleep well?" Thomas asked, though he could see from her tired eyes that she had spent much of the night worrying. "Some," Elena replied honestly. "I keep thinking about what Mr. Petrov said about legal authorities and other methods. In Russia, I learned that men like him have many ways to get what they want." Thomas sat down at the table, accepting the plate of eggs and fresh biscuits Elena had prepared. "Elena, I need to ride into town today to speak with Sheriff Henderson about your situation. Would you prefer to come with me, or would you feel safer staying here?" Elena considered the question carefully. What kind of man is this sheriff? Can he be trusted? "I believe so," Thomas said. "Jim Henderson has been sheriff here for 8 years. He's honest and doesn't like bullies. But I understand your concern about trusting people in authority positions. I think I should come with you," Elena decided. "If I am to make a new life here, I need to meet the people who might help protect it. And if we are to work together against these men, you should not have to explain my situation secondhand." Thomas felt impressed by Elena's practical thinking. Despite her fear, she was approaching their problem strategically rather than simply hoping it would disappear. After breakfast, they hitched up the wagon and began the journey to Copper Falls. Elena had wrapped herself in a shawl and bonnet that concealed much of her face, but she sat upright with determination rather than cowering in fear. "Thomas," Elena said as they traveled, using his first name for the first time, "I need to tell you something important about the papers Petrov mentioned." Thomas encouraged her to continue with a nod. "During the voyage, I became friendly with another woman who was traveling under similar circumstances. Her name was Katerina, and she was from Poland. She had learned some English from a previous employer and helped translate documents for several of us during the journey." Elena paused, gathering her thoughts carefully. "Katerina told me that the papers we signed were not immigration documents at all. They were contracts for indentured servitude. The terms were written to be confusing even for native speakers, but they essentially gave Petrov's organization ownership of us until we worked off debts that could never realistically be repaid." Thomas felt his anger rising again. These people are criminals, plain and simple. Slavery was outlawed in this country 40 years ago. "Yes, but," Katerina explained, that they use legal language to make their contracts appear legitimate. They claim the women owe money for transportation, food, housing, and other expenses. The amounts are set so high that it would take years of work to repay them, and they add new charges constantly. "What happened to Katerina?" Thomas asked, though he feared the answer. Elena's expression darkened. "She was taken in Chicago. When the train was delayed, several men came looking for specific women. Katerina tried to hide, but they found her. I was fortunate that my name was not on their immediate list, probably because they expected me to be delivered to them voluntarily. Thomas realized that Elena's escape had been even more miraculous than he had first understood. If she had been captured in Chicago, he would never have known what happened to his mail-order bride. She simply would have disappeared. When they reached Copper Falls, Thomas drove directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Henderson was a tall, weathered man in his 50s with keen eyes and a reputation for fairness. Thomas had known him for years and trusted his integrity. "Jim, I need to discuss a serious situation involving Miss Volkov here," Thomas began. "She's the woman I've been corresponding with about marriage, but it turns out she's been caught up in some kind of criminal operation." Elena spoke up, her voice clear despite her nervousness. "Sheriff Henderson, I believe I have been the victim of human trafficking. Men brought me to America under false pretenses and now claim I must work off debts I never legitimately incurred." Sheriff Henderson listened carefully as Elena recounted her story, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Thomas could see that the lawman was taking the situation seriously and was already thinking about how to address it legally. "Miss Volkov, do you still have any of the documents you signed during your journey?" Henderson asked. Elena reached into her small traveling bag and produced several papers written in Russian with official-looking stamps. "These are what they gave me. I was told they were required for immigration." Henderson examined the documents carefully, though he obviously couldn't read Russian. "I'll need to find someone who can translate these properly. But, based on what you've told me, this sounds like a clear case of fraud and attempted kidnapping." "There's more, Sheriff," Thomas said. "Yesterday, a man named Dmitry Petrov came to my ranch making threats. He claimed Elena belonged to his organization and that he had legal authority to take her." Henderson's expression hardened. "Did he threaten violence?" "Not directly, but he implied there would be consequences if Elena didn't comply with his demands. He also suggested that some legal authorities might support his claims." The sheriff stood up and walked to his filing cabinet, pulling out several folders. "I've been hearing rumors about organized criminal activity involving immigrant women. There have been reports from Denver and Salt Lake City about similar situations. It sounds like these people have expanded their operations into our area." Elena leaned forward anxiously. "Sheriff, what kind of protection can you provide?" Petrov suggested that his organization has resources and connections that might make official protection ineffective. Henderson met her gaze directly. "Miss Volkov, I won't lie to you. These criminal organizations sometimes do have corrupt contacts in various official positions. But they also rely on fear and intimidation to control their victims. Once someone stands up to them with proper legal support, they often move on to easier targets." "What do you recommend we do?" Thomas asked. "First, I'm going to send these documents to a federal marshal in Helena who deals with interstate criminal activity. This is clearly a federal matter since it involves transportation across state lines for criminal purposes." Henderson pulled out a form and began writing. "Second, I'm going to swear out a warrant for this Petrov character's arrest. If he shows up in my county again making threats, I'll have legal grounds to hold him." "And third?" Elena asked. "Third, you two need to be very careful. These people don't give up easily when money is involved. They might try to take Elena by force if they think legal intimidation won't work." Thomas felt a chill at the sheriff's words. He had hoped that involving law enforcement would quickly resolve the situation, but it seemed they were just beginning a longer fight. Henderson continued. "Thomas, I'd recommend you consider staying in town for a few days while we sort this out. The hotel can provide secure lodging, and there are more people around to discourage any attempt at kidnapping." Elena spoke up immediately. "Sheriff Henderson, I appreciate your concern, but I do not want to be driven into hiding. If I am to make a life in this community, I cannot start by cowering in a hotel room." Thomas admired Elena's courage, but worried about her safety. "Elena, it might be wiser to be cautious until we know more about what we're dealing with." "Thomas, I have been running and hiding for weeks," Elena replied firmly. "These men have power only if I allow fear to control my decisions. I would prefer to return to your ranch and continue learning about my potential new life while taking reasonable precautions." Sheriff Henderson nodded approvingly. "Miss Volkov, I respect your position. But if you're going to stay at the ranch, we need to take some specific security measures. Over the next hour, Henderson outlined a plan for protecting Elena while building a legal case against Petrov's organization. Thomas would carry a gun at all times and would signal the sheriff if any strangers appeared on his property. Elena would avoid being alone outside the house, and they would establish regular check-ins with town authorities. Henderson also suggested that Elena visit with some of the local women to begin building community connections. If you're planning to make Copper Falls your home, it's important for people to know you and care about your welfare. Criminals prefer to target isolated victims. That afternoon, Thomas took Elena to meet Mrs. Sarah Williams, who ran the general store with her husband. Sarah was known for her kindness toward newcomers and her extensive knowledge of everyone in the community. "Mrs. Williams, I'd like you to meet Miss Elena Volkov," Thomas said. "She's the woman I've been corresponding with about marriage, and she's recently arrived from Russia." Sarah Williams was a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s who immediately made Elena feel welcome. "Oh, my dear, what a long journey you must have had. Thomas has mentioned your letters several times. Please, come sit down and tell me about yourself." Elena explained her background carefully, mentioning her skills as a seamstress and her interest in gardening. She avoided discussing the criminal situation, following Henderson's advice to keep that information limited to official channels. Sarah was immediately interested in Elena's sewing abilities. "We have very few skilled seamstresses in this area. Most women make do with basic mending and simple garments. If you decided to establish a business, you could probably find plenty of customers." The conversation continued for an hour, with Sarah introducing Elena to several other women who came into the store. Elena's nervousness gradually faded as she realized that the local community was genuinely welcoming to newcomers. On the ride back to the ranch, Elena seemed more relaxed than Thomas had seen her since her arrival. "The women here are very kind," she observed. "In Russia, it took much longer for people to accept outsiders. Small communities like this depend on newcomers," Thomas explained. "Everyone understands that we need new people to grow and prosper. Most folks are willing to help someone who wants to contribute." That evening, Elena prepared another excellent meal while Thomas tended to his evening chores. The domestic routine felt natural despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Thomas found himself hoping that they could move beyond the current crisis and explore the relationship they had begun building through their letters. After dinner, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. Elena seemed thoughtful, and Thomas wondered what she was thinking about their situation. "Thomas," Elena said finally, "I want you to understand that I did not come to America seeking charity or rescue. In my letters, I tried to be honest about wanting a partnership with someone who could appreciate my skills and contributions." Thomas nodded. "I remember. You wrote about wanting to build something together, not just finding security." "Yes, but now my situation has become complicated by these criminal matters. I worry that you might feel obligated to help me rather than genuinely wanting to explore a relationship." Thomas considered her words carefully. Elena was asking him to separate his protective instincts from his romantic feelings, which showed remarkable emotional intelligence given her stressful circumstances. "Elena, I won't pretend that my feelings aren't influenced by wanting to protect you from Petrov and his people, but I was already developing strong feelings for you based on our letters and our time together before this crisis emerged." Elena smiled, the first completely relaxed smile Thomas had seen from her. "That is good to know. I was hoping that when this danger passes, we might continue getting to know each other as we originally planned." They were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Thomas immediately became alert, reaching for the rifle he had kept close since Petrov's visit. Two riders approached the house, but as they came closer, Thomas relaxed slightly. He recognized one of them as Deputy Marshal Frank Morrison from Helena. "Mr. Mitchell, Miss Volkov," Morrison called out as he dismounted. "Sheriff Henderson sent word that you've encountered some trouble with criminal elements. I'm here to discuss federal involvement in your case." Elena tensed again, but Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's all right." Henderson said he was contacting federal authorities. Morrison was a serious man in his 30s with extensive experience dealing with organized criminal activity across the territory. He listened carefully as Elena recounted her story once again, asking detailed questions about dates, locations, and the people involved. Miss Volkov, your case fits a pattern we've been tracking for several months, Morrison explained. There's a criminal network operating across multiple states, bringing European women to America under false pretenses and then forcing them into prostitution or other forms of labor. How widespread is this operation? Thomas asked. Larger than we initially realized. We estimate they've trafficked several hundred women over the past 2 years. Your escape is actually the first break we've had in building a case against the leadership. Elena looked worried. Does that mean I am in greater danger because I can provide evidence against them? Morrison nodded seriously. Potentially, yes. But it also means we can offer you federal protection while we build our case. Your testimony could help us shut down their entire operation and free other women who are currently trapped. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Elena's safety was now connected to a much larger criminal investigation that could have national implications. What kind of protection can you provide? Thomas asked. We can station deputies in the area and provide secure transportation if Elena needs to travel for legal proceedings. We're also working with immigration authorities to ensure that Elena's status in America is completely legitimate regardless of any fraudulent documents she may have signed. Elena straightened her shoulders with determination. Marshal Morrison, if my testimony can help other women in similar situations, I am willing to cooperate fully with your investigation. These criminals must be stopped. Morrison smiled approvingly. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear, Miss Volkov. Your courage could make the difference in this case. As the evening progressed, Morrison outlined the federal investigation and explained how Elena's testimony would fit into their broader case. Thomas realized that their quiet ranch was about to become part of a significant law enforcement operation with national implications. When Morrison and his companion finally departed, Elena and Thomas sat together processing everything they had learned. The situation was more serious than they had initially realized, but they also had more support than Thomas had expected. Are you having second thoughts about staying here? Thomas asked gently. This isn't the peaceful new life you were hoping for. Elena considered the question seriously before answering. Thomas, I came to America believing I would face challenges and uncertainties. The specific nature of these challenges is different than I expected, but I still believe I can build a good life here. And now I have the opportunity to help other women avoid the trap I escaped. Thomas felt his respect for Elena growing even deeper. She was not just a victim of circumstances. She was a strong woman making deliberate choices about her future despite facing real danger. Then, we'll see this through together, Thomas promised. Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone. As they prepared for bed that night, Thomas positioned his rifle near the front door and made sure all the windows were secured. Elena had proven her courage repeatedly, but he knew that Petrov and his associates would not give up their criminal enterprise without a fight. The federal investigation would provide protection and legal support, but it would also make Elena a high-value target for the criminal organization. Thomas was prepared to defend his home and the remarkable woman who had brought both love and danger into his previously quiet life. Thomas Mitchell stood at the train station platform, his hands shaking slightly as he held the photograph. The woman in the picture had kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her name was Elena Volkov, and she had traveled thousands of miles from Russia to become his wife. At 38 years old, Thomas had given up hope of finding love the traditional way in his small Montana town. The year was 1903, and mail-order marriages were common on the frontier. Men outnumbered women by huge margins in the Western Territories. Thomas owned a successful cattle ranch outside of Copper Falls, a town with barely 300 residents. He was considered a good catch, financially stable, well-respected, and known for his fair treatment of workers. Yet he remained alone. The correspondence had started 6 months earlier. Thomas had placed an advertisement in a newspaper that circulated in Eastern European communities. He described himself honestly, a hard-working rancher seeking a wife who wanted a new life in America. He promised a comfortable home, respect, and the chance to build something together. Elena's first letter had been written in careful English. She explained that she was 26 years old, unmarried, and caring for her younger siblings after their parents died of tuberculosis. She worked as a seamstress in St. Petersburg, but dreamed of a better life. Her brother Pavel had already emigrated to America and sent encouraging reports about opportunities in the new country. Over the months, their letters became longer and more personal. Elena wrote about her love of gardening and cooking. She described the harsh Russian winters and her hope for a warmer climate. Thomas shared details about ranch life, the beauty of the Montana landscape, and his vision for expanding his cattle operation. He found himself looking forward to her letters more than anything else in his routine. The train whistle echoed across the platform, snapping Thomas back to the present moment. Black smoke billowed from the locomotive as it approached the station. His heart pounded with nervous excitement. In minutes, he would meet the woman who might become his life partner. As passengers began stepping off the train, Thomas scanned each face anxiously. Farmers returning from market trips, traveling salesmen with their sample cases, and a few families relocating to start fresh lives in the West. Then he saw her. Elena Volkov stepped carefully down from the passenger car, carrying a worn leather satchel and wearing a simple blue dress that had seen better days. She was prettier than her photograph suggested, with auburn hair neatly arranged and intelligent green eyes that surveyed the unfamiliar surroundings. But something in her expression seemed different from what Thomas had expected. There was a wariness, almost a fear, that hadn't come through in her letters. Thomas approached slowly, removing his hat respectfully. "Miss Volkov, I'm Thomas Mitchell." Elena studied his face carefully before responding. "Yes, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you for meeting me." Her English was more heavily accented than her letters had suggested, and she spoke quietly, as if afraid to be overheard. They stood awkwardly for a moment, two strangers who had shared intimate thoughts through letters but had never actually met. Thomas gestured toward his wagon, which was loaded with supplies from his monthly trip to town. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch." As they walked toward the wagon, Thomas noticed Elena glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked gently. Elena hesitated before answering. "No, Mr. Mitchell. I am just adjusting to being in a new place." Thomas helped her into the wagon seat, noting how she flinched slightly at his touch. Her hands were calloused from hard work, and he could see old bruises on her wrists that she tried to hide with her sleeves. Something was clearly wrong, but he decided not to press for answers immediately. The ride to the ranch gave them time to talk more comfortably. Thomas pointed out landmarks along the way: the creek where he watered his cattle, the meadow where wildflowers bloomed in spring, and the distant mountains that provided a dramatic backdrop to his property. Elena listened politely, but continued to seem preoccupied. "The ranch house isn't fancy," Thomas explained as they approached his property, "but it's solid and comfortable. I built most of it myself over the years. There's a garden plot behind the house that I thought you might enjoy working." Elena's expression brightened slightly at the mention of gardening. "That would be very nice, Mr. Mitchell. In my letters, I mentioned that I enjoy growing vegetables and flowers." The ranch house was indeed simple but well-maintained. 2 stories with a wraparound porch, painted white with green shutters. A barn and several outbuildings completed the homestead. Thomas had spent the past week cleaning and preparing, wanting everything to be perfect for Elena's arrival. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. Thomas had furnished it with handmade wooden furniture and a few comforts, colorful quilts made by women in town, curtains sewn from cheerful fabric, and a shelf of books he had collected over the years. He showed Elena to the spare bedroom he had prepared for her, explaining that they would take time to get to know each other before making any permanent decisions about marriage. That evening, Elena prepared dinner using supplies Thomas had stocked in the kitchen. She was clearly an excellent cook, preparing a hearty stew with fresh bread that filled the house with wonderful aromas. As they ate together at his simple wooden table, Thomas tried to learn more about her journey and her life in Russia. "The voyage across the ocean took nearly 3 weeks, Elena explained. "I had never been on a ship before. Many passengers became very sick, but I was fortunate to avoid the worst of it." "And the train journey from New York?" Thomas asked. Elena paused, that worried expression returning to her face. "It was eventful. There were delays in Chicago. I had to wait 2 extra days for the connecting train." Something in her tone suggested there was more to the story, but Thomas didn't want to make her uncomfortable by pressing for details. Instead, he told her about his daily routine on the ranch, the seasonal cycles of cattle ranching, and his plans for expanding the operation. As the evening progressed, Elena began to relax slightly. She asked thoughtful questions about ranch operations and seemed genuinely interested in learning about her potential new life. She admired the quilts and asked about the women who had made them, showing interest in connecting with the local community. When it came time to retire for the evening, Elena thanked Thomas formally for his hospitality. "You have been very kind, Mr. Mitchell. The house is lovely, and dinner was pleasant. I hope we can continue to get to know each other better." Thomas lay awake for hours that night, thinking about the woman sleeping in the next room. Elena was clearly intelligent and capable, and he found himself genuinely attracted to her. But there were mysteries about her situation that troubled him. The nervous glances, the old bruises, and the sense that she was running from something rather than simply seeking a new opportunity. The next morning, Thomas woke early as always to tend to his cattle. He left a note for Elena explaining his morning routine and suggesting she explore the house and property at her own pace. When he returned for breakfast, he found her working in the garden plot, already assessing the soil and planning potential plantings. "The earth is good here," she said, looking up with the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "In Russia, we had to work very hard to grow anything. This soil has promise." Over breakfast, Elena seemed more relaxed and talkative. She asked detailed questions about the local growing season, what vegetables grew well in Montana, and where she might obtain seeds. Thomas found her enthusiasm infectious and began to hope that she might truly be happy at the ranch. However, their peaceful morning was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Thomas was repairing fence posts when he heard a horse approaching at high speed. A stranger rode up to the house, a well-dressed man with a stern expression and calculating eyes. From his position near the barn, Thomas could see the man speaking to Elena, who had emerged from the house to greet the visitor. Even from a distance, Thomas could tell that Elena was frightened. Her body language was tense, and she kept glancing toward the barn where Thomas was working. Thomas set down his tools and walked toward the house, wanting to learn who this unexpected visitor might be and why his presence seemed to upset Elena so much. As he approached, he could hear the conversation more clearly. The stranger was speaking in accented English, his tone demanding and aggressive. "You cannot simply disappear, Elena. There are obligations that must be fulfilled. People are expecting you to honor your commitments." Elena responded in rapid Russian, her voice shaking with emotion. The stranger replied sharply in the same language, clearly angry about something. Thomas didn't understand the words, but the threatening tone was unmistakable. "Is there a problem here?" Thomas asked firmly, stepping into the conversation with the confidence of a man on his own property. The stranger turned to assess Thomas with cold, calculating eyes. "You must be Mr. Mitchell. I am Dmitry Petrov. I have business to discuss with Miss Volkov regarding her arrangements for coming to America." Thomas looked at Elena, who appeared on the verge of tears. "What kind of arrangements?" he asked. Petrov smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Miss Volkov has not been entirely honest with you about her situation, Mr. Mitchell. Her passage to America was not simply a matter of personal choice. There were financial arrangements made, debts incurred, and promises that must be honored." Elena spoke quickly in English, her accent thicker due to her emotional state. "Mr. Mitchell, I can explain everything. This man, he is not what he seems. The arrangements he speaks of, they were not what I agreed to." Petrov laughed harshly. Elena owes a significant debt for her passage to America. Her brother Pavel made arrangements for her transportation, but he could not pay the full amount immediately. I provided the necessary funds with the understanding that Elena would work to repay the debt. Thomas felt his stomach tighten as he began to understand the implications. "What kind of work?" "The kind that makes use of a young woman's natural talents," Petrov replied with a predatory smile. "There are establishments in larger cities where European women are highly valued. Elena's debt can be worked off in 6 months, perhaps less if she applies herself diligently." Elena stepped closer to Thomas, her fear now obvious. "Mr. Mitchell, I never agreed to such arrangements. My brother told me only that he had found a way for me to come to America. I thought I was coming to meet you and perhaps build a new life. I learned the truth only during the journey. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest. Petrov was clearly involved in human trafficking, preying on desperate women seeking better lives in America. Elena had been tricked into a situation that amounted to slavery. The lady is under my protection now, Thomas said firmly. Any debts or arrangements you claim exist will have to be resolved through proper legal channels. Petrov's expression hardened. Mr. Mitchell, you do not understand the situation. Elena signed documents. There are legal obligations. And there are other people involved who will not be pleased if their investment is not recovered. What documents? Thomas demanded. Let's see these supposed legal obligations. Elena spoke up, her voice stronger now despite her fear. The papers were all in Russian. I was told they were immigration documents required for entry to America. I could not read them carefully because I was ill during much of the voyage. Thomas realized that Elena had been deliberately deceived. Immigration documents would not have included provisions for forced labor or debt bondage. Petrov and his associates had taken advantage of Elena's limited English and desperate circumstances. I think it's time for you to leave my property, Mr. Petrov, Thomas said, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle he always carried when working around the ranch. Petrov noticed the gesture, and his tone became more threatening. This is not over, Mr. Mitchell. Elena belongs to us until her debt is paid. There are legal authorities who will support our claim. And there are other methods of ensuring compliance if legal means prove insufficient. After Petrov rode away, Elena collapsed into tears on the porch steps. Thomas sat beside her, offering his handkerchief and trying to provide comfort without being presumptuous about their relationship. I am so sorry, Mr. Mitchell, Elena sobbed. I never intended to bring danger to your home. When I wrote to you, I thought I was free to make my own choices. I had no idea about these arrangements my brother had made. Thomas felt overwhelming protective instincts toward this brave woman who had traveled so far only to find herself trapped in an impossible situation. Elena, you don't need to apologize. You're the victim here. But I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with so I can help protect you. Over the next hour, Elena explained everything she had learned during her journey to America. Her brother Pavel had indeed emigrated earlier, but he had fallen into debt with criminal organizations that controlled much of the immigrant smuggling trade. When Elena wrote expressing her desire to come to America, Pavel saw an opportunity to reduce his own debts by offering his sister as collateral. Elena had been told she was traveling to meet Thomas as planned, but the criminal organization expected to collect her in Chicago and transport her to a brothel in San Francisco. Only a fortunate delay in train schedules had allowed her to slip away and continue to Montana as originally planned. They will not give up easily, Elena warned. Petrov spoke of other women who tried to escape. The consequences were severe. Thomas realized they were dealing with dangerous people who would not hesitate to use violence to protect their criminal enterprise. But he also knew he could not simply turn Elena over to such people, regardless of any supposed legal documents. That evening, Thomas began planning how to protect Elena and deal with the threat posed by Petrov and his criminal organization. He would need help from local law enforcement, but he also knew that corruption sometimes extended into official channels. The situation required careful navigation to ensure Elena's safety while building a legal case against her would-be captors. As night fell over the ranch, Thomas and Elena sat together on the porch, watching stars appear in the clear Montana sky. Despite the danger they faced, Thomas felt a growing connection to this remarkable woman who had shown such courage in impossible circumstances. Whatever happens, Elena, you won't face this alone, Thomas promised. We'll find a way to ensure your freedom and safety. Elena reached over and squeezed his hand gently. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I had hoped to find a new life in America, but I never imagined finding such kindness and protection. Thomas squeezed back, realizing that his feelings for Elena had already grown far beyond what he had expected from their letter correspondence. She was not just a potential wife anymore. She was a woman in danger who had earned his complete loyalty and protection. The next morning would bring new challenges as they worked to build a legal case against Petrov while ensuring Elena's immediate safety. But Sitting together under the vast Montana sky, Thomas felt confident that they could face whatever difficulties lay ahead. Elena had already proven her courage and resilience by escaping from her captors once. Together, they would find a way to secure her permanent freedom and perhaps build the life together that had brought them into contact in the first place.